Welcome to another edition of the Two World Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Jacob, and I have with me today.
I am Barney.
And Barney and I have been talking about looking into the recent Mission Sunday that Worcester Mennonite Church did, where we welcomed guest speakers from the Ukraine to share about their experiences of moving to the United States, to hear their reflections on what it had been like as they left the Ukraine, how they're feeling currently with where the situation is right now in their home country, and also just any broader thoughts or reflections or hopes that they have for the future. And so Barney and I thought it might be interesting to reflect on what they had to share, and hopefully that could speak to some of the themes that we like to explore relating to intercultural experiences and hospitality, and also growing in our understanding of the world and seeking after peacemaking and reconciliation. So just as we're getting started here, Barney, I know that I was able to see them speak, but the video didn't record quite very smoothly, so it was hard to watch online. So I quickly this morning gave you some articles to look at and a little summary of this service. So you're kind of jumping in, but just as we're getting started with the topic, I just wanted to ask, do you have any initial thoughts when you come to this topic of these guest speakers from Ukraine and what they had to share for Mission Sunday at Worcester Mennonite?
Yeah, I think primarily it was so helpful for me to see them as I did on the recording online on YouTube, and to read a little bit more about their journey, just as a way to get a sense of what had been happening in their home, in their country, but just before the war started, and then afterwards. Here in Japan, they still tend to update what is happening fairly regularly, 2 or 3 times a week on the news. But I wonder, the news sites that I see in the US, I don't see as much information as to like what is happening in Ukraine, as opposed to how that is impacting what's happening in the US as much. So, but it's nice to be able to have a sense of understanding, how bad it is, instead of just seeing footage from somewhat far away, or seeing people for just a few seconds here and there through the news, to have a chance to kind of sit down and hear these people's story, and read more about what happened, and especially in Ukraine, and then the whole journey from there to the US. It really is a good chance to pause and understand the situation a little bit better, and to really have it impact ourselves and our hearts, I think. And learning more about their background and everything, it really, I was really helped to make the situation a lot more real, and create some kind of connection for me with that. And I was really thankful for that.
Thanks for sharing that, Barney. I think that's so true that um, opportunities like this to hear somebody's story from another country, particularly when they're fleeing in wartime and seeking safety for their family, it's a heavy thing to hear, and it can be sad and hard as we think about the realities that they've had to face. But at the same time, it's so important to hear the story and let it touch our hearts and stir in us compassion and the desire to work for change and to try to help in the ways that we can. And I was able to meet Nataliia, who was the mother in this family that moved to the United States, because she has been working at Central Christian for the past year, and she is there for the drop off and the pickup. Particularly, I would talk with her some after school when I would go to pick up Hannah, because she's there making sure that all of the kids are safe and that they're doing well. And so I've been able to hear a little bit of her story that way, and just to hear about her heart for her son Max, who came with her, when she first came, her husband didn't come with her. He stayed behind and was continuing to help with relief efforts, driving supplies on a truck to areas of Ukraine where they didn't have access to food, and he would bring bread to people and different things like that. And he did that for a number of months before coming. And so when she first arrived, I remember Terry Shue, who works at Central now, but had been a pastor for many years at Kidron Mennonite. I remember him introducing her and saying, "Yes, she's come, but her husband hasn't come yet." And just that wait, and then knowing that finally he arrived, and when we were able to invite them to come and speak, it was really powerful to hear their whole family speak to their experience. And so looking forward to sharing some pictures from that time, and hopefully an opportunity for us to actually explore some of the things that they said. But before I do that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Mission Sunday at Worcester Mennonite and what we were trying to do. Each year we have two of these Mission Sundays, one in the fall and one in the spring. And typically we'll invite a guest speaker from one of our partnering organizations, often Mennonite Central Committee or Mennonite Disaster Service. But sometimes it's more local ministries like Open Arms Hispanic Ministry or Camp Luz. But this year we really felt like not just hearing the story of a partner, but hearing a story of somebody from a place that really needs support and needs extra attention from our church and from our community. And so that's why this year we felt it would be so good to hear from Nataliia and her husband Alex and their son Max. But as you know, like, we try as hard as possible in church to show hospitality when guests come. And just as we do, as we talk about on our podcast, we try to do as individuals. And so part of that involved thinking, what can we offer when our guests come that would be meaningful for people at Worcester Mennonite and might be something that would bless them as well. And so I remembered that in Parma, Ohio, there is a Ukrainian community, and there is a beautiful Ukrainian Catholic cathedral. There are Ukrainian restaurants, and there's a bakery. And so I thought, oh, how interesting would it be to drive up to Parma and to get some Ukrainian food to bring back for Sunday during our fellowship time to have. And so if I can, I just want to start with that part of the journey and then move into the heavier and more serious part of their story, if that's okay. So, but I just want to start here with a picture of this Ukrainian bakery and store that sells food items. And when I drove up, I wasn't sure what to expect. I had never been to this store before, and I didn't really know what to order either. And so when I walked in, I was greeted by the person at the front, and I explained to her, oh, we're having this event in our church, and we're having guest speakers from the Ukraine, and we wanted to just have a sampling of a variety of foods that would give our congregation a taste of Ukrainian food. And what do you recommend for me to take that would be good? And so she took time and brought out different things and showed me, and it was really encouraging and exciting as I just anticipated, bringing these things back for our congregation would be so good. And so I took a little picture of some of these items that we got here. So on the left, you have a Ukrainian type of kibasi. And then in the front, you have on that, just moving from left to right, that it's kind of sauerkraut, a Ukrainian form of sauerkraut. And then to the right of that, you have the borscht, which is a delicious beet soup. And then in the back row there, in the middle, you have a variety of pastries with different fruits. And then to the far right, you have a Ukrainian form of a crepe that's wrapped around blueberries and cherries. And so those were some of the foods that were sampled. And it was really rich. And I'll show a picture of that at the end of people enjoying the food. But as I drove down the street, I noticed that the St. Josaphat Ukrainian Catholic Cathedral had something very interesting on the front. And as we were thinking about Mission Sunday, I thought, I wonder what is going on there in that mural. And so I did a little research, and you see on the bottom of the mural, you have 988 to
Mm-hmm.
1988. And
Mm-hmm.
as I looked into it more, I realized that uh, this was celebrating the 1,000-year anniversary of the baptism of Vladimir, who is um, the he was the ruler in 988 in Rus, which is um, an early kingdom near modern day where Kiev would be.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was, um, in terms of Christianity and the spread of Christianity in that region, this year in 988, when this leader was baptized, marks this um, huge moment with the opening of the door to missions and the Christian faith to be present in Ukraine, or what was the ancient kingdom of Rus that continues into modern day Ukraine and extends out into Russia. And um, so at the very top, you have Jesus's arms extended, and then below him, you have Vladimir, who was baptized, as one of those figures represented. And then as you move down in the center of the graphic, I don't know if you see towards the left, there's a hooded figure.
Mm-hmm.
And then uh, opposite of him, there's a person in the middle, and then opposite of him is a person with white hair. And those are the missionaries, Cyril and Methodius,
Ah.
who were often known as the apostles to the Slavs. And they took the Christian faith all throughout Eastern Europe. And you might recognize the name Cyril. That's where we get the term Cyrillic alphabet from. That
Ah.
is used in a lot of the languages and Slavic languages in Eastern Europe. So
Hmm.
on Mission Sunday, I thought, isn't it appropriate to show this mural of telling the story of the mission to Eastern Europe and Ukraine, historically, over 1,000 years
Mm.
old, celebrating the baptism of this one leader, but then also the work of these two missionaries. And there's more going on in the mural, but I just thought even highlighting that is so interesting. But then as I pulled back and I was looking at the sign outside of the cathedral, I saw a "We Stand with Ukraine" sign,
Mhm.
which I thought was so interesting because it shows that mission is about the past, as we saw in the mural, like what God
Mm.
has done then, um, and how that we carry that with us. But then it's also about where we are now in the world that we're in, and the challenges that we're facing at this moment. And so that also felt like appropriate to share on Mission Sunday, that we stand with Ukraine in a time of crisis and suffering, and
Mm.
our prayer and our hearts should be extending to relief and reconciliation and end to this war and healing of the people who have gone through it. And so um, I felt like that was providential, that I happened to just drive down the street and see these things there, and then could share with our church. This is part of the story today. It's not just about the mission of the past, which was amazing and important, but it's also about the need for reconciliation and healing now, in that same region. And so it was in that light that we were able to, after kind of presenting that to the congregation, we were able to welcome our guests. And you have a picture here of their family: Nataliia, her son Max, and her husband Alex. They are the Murza family, and um, here they are, holding some bowls, and they have done a number of fundraisers to assist people who are still in the Ukraine, and they can send funds back along with other resources. And I think that these bowls are related to some of those fundraising efforts, because the Shu family locally in Kidron, um, uh, Terry Shu, Tim Shu, and their broader family have done a lot of arts and crafts and making of pottery and things. And so these types of things can be um, used and given in the effort to raise funds. And so this is just one of those pictures of their family. And so before I go on any further, I want to stop and give you a chance to respond, Barney, with things that have been said so far, and see if there's anything that jumps out to you.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you were able to do this for the Mission Sunday, instead of I mean, this could easily have been just a wonderful Sunday service on its own, but the way that everything connects so nicely for Mission Sunday is so great to hear. On the one hand, like you say, um, that great mural that you found on the church that you were driving by, and talking about how important it was. Um, just the baptism of that one leader, and how that started with the spread of faith and Christianity in that area, and um, that the church itself felt that it was that important that they dedicated such a large space to that event, on the outside, as kind of a witness itself. And and then I like, on the more intimate sense, how when I read more about the family themselves, and how um, one of the articles you shared with me, I mentioned uh, how Natalia and Max decided that they needed to leave, and they had the chance to go to Germany, and then they had the chance to go to the U.S., and that um, that Alex, the husband, the father, was staying behind to help, um, in a humanitarian way, to deliver supplies. And I kept thinking, I wonder what it is that he did. What did he do? How, as I was reading through this article, how does he have such an amazing heart for helping people? He must have been like a social worker or something like that. And then you read that he and his wife were both attorneys, were lawyers in Ukraine. And seeing his story, and seeing that he felt this need to allow his family to go first, and trust their care to others and their direction to God, while he stayed behind and stayed helped to care for the people around him, who, or even, in a much broader sense, he probably was traveling many quite a distance to help the people that he was helping. And so that their story, hearing their story, um, we get a sense of how appropriate it is to hear about them, and what they went through for Mission Sunday specifically, um, especially as often at the church at Westermenic, that one of maybe our partner, that someone we might hear speaking, is connected to Mennonite Central Committee, which especially focuses on aid and serving, the aspect of servitude, serving others around the world. Um, and then the gesture that came to your mind to bring food into this event, I can't think of anything better. Putting myself in their shoes, uh, how it's the one thing that you can just never replace. That you can't substitute it. You can't quite make the same thing as much as you try. And then having like the authentic, made by another Ukrainian person. I think that must have been just such an amazing gesture. I think they must have been so touched by that, and to be able to share that also, um, as a tangible form with the rest of the church, just adds one more layer to it, and I just think that's so wonderful.
Thank you, Barney. I really appreciate that. It felt like such a unique opportunity, and I'm so grateful that things came together in that way, that we could offer those things as a sign of appreciation and hospitality. And it was also interesting, and I'll show a picture of that at the end, how people lingered and seemed to enjoy just the time to talk and to enjoy the food. Um, but maybe we could spend a little bit of time uh, listening and reflecting on some of the quotes and the things that were shared during their talk. And so I'm just quickly going to share a picture of our guests, and this was from the actual service. And just to explain to those who are watching through YouTube, as you look at the image from left to right, um, you'll see Craig Mast, who was interviewing our guests, and he and his wife Krista, who is on the other side of the group, all the way to the right, um, they have been incredibly hospitable to the Murza family and have been close friends to them since they moved here and have helped them get settled. So they were wonderful candidates to be up there on the stage with them, interviewing them about their story. So there's Craig, and then immediately to his right is Alex, their son. And then in the middle is Nataliia. And she also does go by the name Natalie too, as she appreciates that, like the American form of her
Mm-hmm.
name. And then to her right is Alex. And then on the end, once again, that's Krista. And so just as Craig and Krista were introducing their guests, they shared that they're refugees from the Ukraine due to the Russian invasion. And that's a heavy thing just to say, even in of itself. And as Craig said in his opening, our friends are from Kiev, and the reason that from Kiev, and the reason that they're here is because of the Russian invasion of their country. There's no other way to say it. And so, one of the things that Nataliia told me afterwards that is so hard is when you talk about this, it's not like you're looking back and the conflict is resolved. It's still unfolding. And so for her and her family to talk about it, they're doing so in a time where there's still a lot of uncertainty and it's heavy. And Craig explained that the conflict has displaced millions of people. 8 million people have been displaced in a country of about 44 million. So that's almost a quarter of, heading towards a quarter of the population in Ukraine have been displaced or have gone from their homes. And so that's heavy.
Mm. Yeah, one out of four people, when you think of it that way. I think it really makes it easier to understand how severe it is when, if you hear something like 8 million out of 44 million, or a quarter of 25% of the people. But when you think that, when you look around and one out of the four people around you would have had to leave their home, and the other three are there but living in incredible distress. And yeah, it is. I forgot to mention this, but thinking about the sign outside of the church, sometimes with some churches, it's a step for them to make such of a political or kind of worldly statement, and being, taking that step to expressly plant signs in front of their church that says that they stand with Ukraine. And obviously, as you say, they're praying for and hoping for resolution and for reconciliation and for compassion on both sides. But to make, to expressly make a statement that church is supporting the people who were put in the place of you know forced into this situation where they're being attacked and have to decide what to do with their lives, like the family that we saw at church. um it sends such a great message of hope, I'm sure, for the community there, and in a broader way that this church, especially, and of course so many other churches, many other organizations are hoping too, for some reconciliation and for some kind of return to sense of justice in this conflict. And yeah, it was great to hear and see what I was able to of the Sunday service, and I'm thankful for it being arranged.
Thank you, Barney. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
it is it's a good point that if you just consider the circumstances, how um, it's so challenging and weighty. And one of the things that Craig and Krista did is they asked Nataliia and Alex to kind of pull back the curtain or reflect a little bit
Mm-hmm.
on what life was like immediately preceding the war breaking out. And um, and it was just really striking to hear what they had to say. They said that that life was very normal, They were just doing their work and hobbies and
mm,
reading and doing sports and socializing with your neighbors. I think Nataliia used the phrase, it was nothing special. There was nothing standing out right up until the point where in the early hours of the morning,
mm,
the
mm.
invasion began, and you started hearing gunfire and bombs dropping. And uh, their son Max was in fifth grade at the time, and um, they were all just reacting as when they started hearing these sounds, and realizing the danger was imminent. Um, they were thinking, how can we keep our son safe? What should we do? We should probably flee the city. And since there was no information available, and
Mm.
they were caught off guard in the early hours of the morning, people just picked a direction because they didn't have
Yes.
any intel, and so they went north or south or whatever route they could take, and they ended up picking the
Mm,
wrong direction and
mm.
fleeing towards
Yeah.
where the conflict was starting, and the siege and the invasion was happening. And so um, they they were able to stay with friends in a city, but it just so happened it was so close to the military action, that then there was no opportunity for any further movement. They just had to bunker down and kind of stay in the building where they were. They were surrounded, and they couldn't leave the village for several days due to the bombings and the danger. And Natalia said, our streets were bombed, and there were four planes, helicopters with soldiers and weapons, and all these explosions. It was so close. And we didn't leave for several days. And so that's probably maybe the closest that they were throughout this
Mm,
whole experience to the action. And then when they got their opportunity in their window, they did flee. They stayed in different places, such as hospitals and shelters, and they moved around a lot because there were no empty places to stay. They eventually received an invitation from someone in the US and decided to move there for safety's sake. And so, as we said earlier, Nataliia and her son and her father-in-law Oleg and her mother-in-law Katya decided to come as refugees, but her husband Alex remained in Ukraine to drive trucks of supplies around the country to places that needed them. Um, but when Nataliia came, she came on a tourist visa because it's hard. The refugee status and the immigration process is complicated, and the easiest entry point for her was to come on a tourist visa. But that meant that there was a lengthy process of transitioning and getting all of her documents necessary to um, be able to establish life here with the ability to work, the ability to rent a home for her family. And so she said in that period, she literally started knocking on doors. She said, I
yeah.
was desperate. I was just knocking on doors, and eventually one opened for us. And so um, it seems like that not only the experience of leaving your home in a time of war, but then the experience of going to a new country and then not knowing how it's going to work out and just seeking whatever you can find for your family. Um, it must have been so hard. Um, so I'm going to stop there for a minute and just ask, is there anything that jumps out to you from this part of the story, Barney, that you might like to comment on?
Yeah. When I hear about what they went through, it reminds me of my time here in Japan after the very big earthquake that we had in 2013 or 2011, and that was in the north, and that was such a strong earthquake. And we had time here where power was inconsistent, and especially when the grocery stores were empty of food, which you never expected, and we were unsure what was happening with the nuclear power plant, not so far away, and there was a lot of uncertainty, and um, life was really tough here, in a way, but and I and then I saw people closer to where the earthquake and in the area where the earthquake had happened and the situation that they were living in. And so I can kind of really think of what it must have been like for them in the shelters, in the hospitals, and the other areas, and um, being with the people around them and all the uncertainty, and just staying in the same clothes or having clothes that maybe aren't appropriate for the weather, but they're the only thing that's available. And just I know that it's something that they're probably in the place where it's something that they feel that they need to remember, but it's something that they don't want to remember either, especially as you say that the conflict is still going on, and there's still so much uncertainty of how what will happen. And I know too that as it shows in the husband's decision to stay behind and help, that they still must be spending so much time and energy thinking about the people who are still there, that they wanted to help more. And so I know that they count themselves so blessed and so fortunate that they were able to have a chance to get themselves and part of their family here to the US. And I know on the other hand that they're just still thinking about the people who are still in the Ukraine. And again, as we found out that they're both attorneys and they're so well qualified to do a number of a lot of what we would think is really important work here. They had to start off, with volunteering or, kind of having some jobs that they're essentially overqualified for it. As they continue to get a hold of a kind of foundation in the community where they are, and probably thinking too, is this where they want to stay? But um, thankfully, knocking on doors and finding people like Craig and Krista, they probably really felt like finally there is something to attach themselves to, and be able to kind of restore that sense of having something that they can hang on to, some kind of place to belong. And to hear them speak, though, they really had such a great their um, their posture, their outlook was I was more positive than I maybe expected, maybe not knowing how the conversation would go, but you could really sense so much gratitude and so much obviously, but such a real sense um, of what feeling like they had been blessed through this whole process, and I was glad to see that, to hear that. It really had a nice, strong, had an impact on me too.
I think that's really true, Barney. And as you were talking there about how they have plugged in volunteering in the community, I wanted to share some pictures that they brought with them to the service on Mission Sunday. And a number of these pictures show their volunteer work at MCC Connections locally. Uh, Not only Alex and Nataliia, but also Alex's parents, Oleg and his wife Katya, have volunteered at MCC and plugged in. And it's just, it has been a very meaningful part of their journey, I think, of being part of the community, that they've plugged into a place where they're helping and getting to know people. And then through the connections there, also finding ways to support the community back home in Ukraine. If you look at the upper left-hand corner of the screen for those watching on YouTube, you'll see Alex and Nataliia holding a quilt. And to the left of that picture is Kay Shu, who pieced the quilt. And to the right, you have the other person involved with the process who knitted and put the quilt together. And there's a lot of symbolic significance of the quilt. Um, the golden part on the bottom represents the wheat, which is one of the main crops of Ukraine. And then the upper portion um, represents the blue sky. And you see the sunflowers in
Mm,
the quilt, which are the national flower of the Ukraine. And
mm,
of course, the blue and the gold are the main colors you find on the Ukrainian flag. And so this quilt actually was created to be a support and a way to raise funds for the community back in Ukraine. And Nataliia and Alex there are standing in the center behind the quilt. And it's interesting because MCC has a number of fundraisers throughout the year. And the one in which this quilt appeared, it raised a lot of funds, but the
mm,
people, they weren't just bidding to own the quilt, they were actually bidding, viewing it as a way also to send support, financial support back um, to the Ukraine. So just to mention what some of the funds have been used for that Alex
mm,
and Nataliia have been able to raise, they have mentioned here that they've been able to buy solar lamps, electric generators, car starters, heating blankets, and portable wood stoves. So these are
mm,
just some of the supplies that they have been able to purchase and send back to Ukraine through partnering organizations who are able to move the supplies through other neighboring countries because you can't ship directly to Ukraine at this time. You have to
mm,
find other supply routes. And so they've worked with partnering organizations to get them through other neighboring countries to the communities there in Ukraine. And I just think it's important to as we've reflected on how heavy and challenging and hard it is that the Murza family has gone through this experience that their country is going through it. It's helpful to hear what they had to say at the end of their talk because Craig and Krista asked them what they've learned through this journey and what their hopes are for the future. And and they said that they continue to grow closer together as a family and also with the broader community here in Ohio. And Nataliia said, family is most important in our life. And then she went on to say, and I thought this was so profound, God has a plan for us. I know this because when we came here, we were very thankful for the support and understanding of people.
mm,
And that is a very common idea that you hear. God has a plan.
mm,
Um, but just to hear her say that and emphasize that after she's come through such a difficult experience, to still be
mhm,
able to lean into that and say, I trust that God has a plan and He's going to walk with us as we continue to go to figure out life here and as we continue to pray and hope to help our country and those back in
mm.
Ukraine. To say that is a very powerful thing. And so I thought it was a very hopeful um, concluding remark after their talk. And so I just wanted to share that and want to ask if anything jumps out to you as you've heard that.
Yeah, I can only echo exactly what you said that uh, sometimes people might think that this phrase gets overused or whatnot or used too lightly, but exactly hearing someone who went through all of this and still there's some uncertainty. I think um, the number of photos that we see Alex in, he's doing a number of different jobs. And so it still gives you the sense that things are still a little bit up in the air. Um, and but then, as Natalie said, thinking about family and how important it is, and thinking about all that she went through, and then probably seeing firsthand as she was knocking on doors and getting connected with the right people, taking that real leap, not knowing not knowing how the community, how the culture really flows, how it really works, and um, but feeling moved and feeling motivated and getting out there and knocking on doors and finding the right people and to be able to go from where they were in a renovated barn to having stable housing that thankfully is being taken care of for them as they're still focusing so much on supporting their neighbors and their community back home for them that she can say with real faith and with real certainty that God definitely has a plan even amidst all of this and it's very very hopeful and something for all of us that maybe those of us who aren't really so connected to really take that hope and to use it as motivation and courage to keep praying about the situation for everyone involved on
Yes,
both sides too. Mm-hmm.
that's right. Yes, that's a good point, Barney. And I, I feel like their message and their posture was one of what you just said, trying to seek for peace and a resolution and help, but not in a vindictive way, um, focused on the anger that could so understandably be present towards the aggression of Russia and particularly those who have made decisions related to the war, but they focused mostly their message on other things that were more positive and
Mm-hmm.
hopeful and seeking the end of the war and seeking peace and reconciliation. That was very powerful. And I also wanted to mention that there was another unique opportunity that Sunday
Mm-hmm.
as they were sharing. We had a guest, a musician who also came to the US um,
Right.
after the war started with his son seeking safety and an opportunity for his son to um, reestablish here. And so his name is Tom, and here's a picture of him. And so we
Mm-hmm.
had our guests share um, their story and then those reflections at the end that we just talked about. And then Tom stood up and he played an amazing piece of special music that was so inspiring, and it really delved into that theme of healing and being authentic with who you are and seeking um, to have that um, be fulfilled and as you at times can be hurt, seeking to be restored. And so to have his music after that story played, it was incredibly powerful. And then after the service, our guests stayed and their children stayed. And we had this time of fellowship where we were able to eat the
Mm-hmm.
snacks from Parma, from the Ukrainian
Mm-hmm.
bakery. And you see a picture here of some of those on the table. And we sat around tables and shared stories and talked more and just enjoyed each other's company. And I think one of the hopes that I have after hosting these guests from Ukraine is that we can keep um, growing with them in relationship and continuing to check in and to see how they're doing and also become friends and have more
Mm-hmm.
moments like this with them where we share meals together, have more times where we can pray for how they are doing here, but also for their family members and their communities back home, and that those efforts that they're doing to raise funds and help that we can come around them and try to help with those efforts as well. And so um, that it seems like there's real potential for that, and that's one of my hopes that we can explore that more. But I wanted to ask, do you have any thoughts or questions before you close our time today?
Yeah, I just appreciated the chance that you were able to, that the church was able to arrange for them to come as guests and to speak um and for Tom to be able to play that music and that it could coincide for the mission Sunday and and I'm sure that everyone there in attendance was very inspired by it and very moved by it and I'm sure that probably they're thinking of ways that they can um take that and act on that inspiration. I would think for sure. And so, as we bring today's episode to a close, we would just like to thank you all for spending time with us today and listening to the story of the Murza family and kind of the insight that they were able to share, that we were able to share on their behalf of what they went through and what other people in the area of Ukraine and around there are going through as well and went through and are going through too. And we hope that their story, especially their concluding story of hope and of understanding God's plan, can serve as inspiration for you as well. And that you will take that and go forth with that too. And we are always happy for you to watch along with us and to listen along with us. And we hope that as we are, that you too are looking forward to our next episode. And so for Barney and my co-host Jacob, this is the Two World Podcast, and we thank you.